Thank you. So, since we last spoke, the public has had fairly large bore access to large language models. And if anything, there is even more urgent discussion of how these large language models, how AI fits into healthcare, what is there really a business case? Which business case is it? And we have two experts here who we can have that discussion. The first is Dr. Matthew Lundgren, who is Chief Medical Information Officer at Nuance Communications, a Microsoft company, and Dr. Chris Mansi, who's the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Viz.ai. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here, Zach. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Zach. Good to be here.
And now to our first question. It's really a two-part question. Could you comment on the relative balance of administrative as opposed to direct clinical applications of generative AI in healthcare in the present and in the immediate future? And depending on what your answer is for the first part of the question, where is the major source of benefit to healthcare organizations for products that are currently in your pipeline? So why don't we start with Matt? Why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And I think it's a really important question. You know, as we start to see this technology sort of roll out, and it's one of the fastest adopted consumer applications in the world, we're seeing a lot of excitement across all kinds of verticals, and healthcare is one of them. And you know, we've already seen some internal work that shows that these models have some medical knowledge, right? And I think that there's a lot of excitement for what clinical use cases these models might be helpful for. But as we take a step back, we start to think about things maybe along a value risk sort of axis, right? Sort of what would be a high value, low risk use case. And a lot of those things are administrative tasks. And, as it turns out, a lot of these models have shown incredible capabilities with, administrative type tasks across verticals. And as we start to explore them in healthcare, we recognize that 25% of healthcare spending is on administrative work, and I think a lot of healthcare systems will tell you that the ratio of administrative professionals to clinical professionals is growing, and so I think that there really is an opportunity there to leverage these tools and technologies, and as we start to roll them out in our day-to-day lives, meaning the Copilot for Word, the Copilot for Outlook, the Copilot for Excel and PowerPoint. I think we're all going to become more comfortable with using these tools, how they make us efficient, how they improve the quality of our work. And I think when that sort of happens, the gap between our capabilities in our daily lives versus the capabilities with our healthcare software is going to grow. So, from my perspective, it's really an obligation to deliver these same efficiencies and capabilities into the healthcare system in the the safest and most responsible way possible.
Thanks. Well, Chris, your company, I would say, focuses primarily on the clinical side of things. And even though I should say parenthetically that I've seen estimates of 25% of medical costs in the United States are administrative, but we're also taking care of patients. So how would you answer this question?
Yeah, look, I think both sides are very important, of huge potential. Viz is an AI platform implemented in most health systems in the US, and we're actually known for our more traditional imaging-based AI that's designed for the entire care team. And just to take a step back and think of what is AI's job in the clinical world? Well, at least in our world, it's to automate disease detection. That's traditionally been on a medical image or an EKG or another bit of healthcare data, and trigger a care pathway based on a clinical guideline. And that has been tremendously successful in reducing the variation in diagnosis and treatment by assisting that specialist care team to get the right patients to the right place. Like we've seen measurable results, stroke patients treated an hour faster, reducing the amount of brain death and therefore the amount of disability. And we've seen a huge impact with chronic disease. For example, in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, We've seen the time from initial ECG to diagnosis has fallen from the pre-AI world of 5 years down to 5 days. And we've also seen a safety net effect where patients with brain aneurysms who would have been missed are caught and they get to the relevant aneurysm specialist. So ultimately, that means more patients treated faster, and really importantly, more patients following best practice guidelines. And that means everyone wins, right? Better patient outcomes, but also better financial outcomes for the hospital, for the payer, for the life science companies that create these drugs and devices that treat these patients. I think generative AI, and particularly large language models, are going to have a huge impact on that kind of model and that kind of work, because they dramatically increase the amount of diseases and the subtlety of disease that we can impact. Additionally, we believe that it's going to dramatically reduce the time and cost it takes to build these models and deploy new care pathways at scale. I think one thing to note, which I think is going to be exactly the same with more traditional imaging-based AI, as we're going to see with foundational generative models, is that and I'm interested to see what Matt thinks of this, but the AI is just going to be part of the solution. Is it 10%? Is it 50%? It's probably closer to 10% of the work. AI can be great at detecting disease or help a doctor make a diagnosis, but it's only effective if there's an effect from it. If someone can do something with that intelligence, with that more meaningful data that a doctor now has. And for us, we're going to invest very heavily both in those platform capabilities that allow the AI to be useful, but also in the generative AI capabilities. Because I agree that the co-pilot world is coming very fast, both in our day-to-day world, but it's coming to healthcare. And we just recently announced actually our own Viz co-pilot, a generative AI co-pilot that we're developing with partners like Mount Sinai, that essentially is trained on clinical guidelines, so that we can provide the treating physician who's looking at a particular patient with a matched medical resource, whether that's a guideline, a academic paper, like a meta-analysis, so that in real time they can have in front of them the most up-to-date medical information for that patient to, again, ensure that AI is meaningful and actionable. I think the goal here is that we want to make sure that every clinician can have the world's best neurologist, cardiologist, renal physician in their pocket, available to them 24/7, and make it extremely actionable.
So, Chris, before we reflect back to Matt to ask him if he sees it as, again, a fraction of the effort of the individuals, I'd like to ask you about your product. In this co-pilot mode, do you think it means that we'll be able to take greater reliance on physician assistants, nurse practitioners, or does your solution presuppose full-time effort of a cardiologist, for example?
Interesting question. Look, I think it will allow us to elevate people to their greatest, to the sort of top of their license, and allow specialist nurses to do more, and therefore allow physicians to do more. I think a world in which the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy specialist is mostly seeing HCM patients, but just across a much broader population, is a world in which patients get better treatment, payers get more efficient care, so they spend less, and hospitals probably get much more efficient care because they're spending less as well.
Yeah, thank you. So, Matt, let's take off from what Chris was saying about how it gets integrated into a part or more of the workflow. And also, could you comment if, on the administrative side, which people are you seeing have the greatest early uptake of this?
Yeah, no, and I think, Chris raised some really important points there too, because, recognizing that there's certainly a role for, finding, really important use cases that change patient care. I mean, physicians and, most of the healthcare system, we've seen a lot of excitement around different technologies over the decades, right? And we really do need to see, evidence, right, that the solutions we're providing, have value and deliver value to our healthcare system and certainly to our patients. And so I think that's the hard work, and I know Chris's team has done quite a bit there. From my perspective, we see this as a exponentially accelerating technology. It's not linear, right? So I think that's hard for us to sort of wrap our brains around. As these features and capabilities continue to advance, we increasingly move into sort of a multimodal world. And you've already seen some of the recent announcements with OpenAI's vision capabilities, right? And if you haven't checked that out, it's definitely worth experimenting with. But I think that those are the kinds of capabilities allowing us to interact with data, to reason with it, to derive the answers that we need, is really an important use case. And that sort of starts to speak to sort of the dynamic interaction with data, changing how we interact with it. And so for me, as I think about, where these applications are, ultimately going to go, well, healthcare is a multimodal space, right? We use images, we use signal data, genomics, and certainly unstructured text. All of those things together, I think, can help us derive the insights that we need. But coming back down to sort of more of the present day, I think from our side, we look at burnout as being a huge factor when we talk to, provider and health systems across the world. Their clinicians are burned out, their staff is leaving. And a lot of that has to do with some of that, documentation work. A lot of it has to do with some of these repetitive tasks that they do as part of the, the routine care of patients. And it's not because of the patient care. And so if we can find opportunities to accelerate their ability to complete some of those required tasks, we think that we can address some of that burnout. So you may have seen some of the work that we've done in partnership with Epic. And if you haven't seen some of the roadmap from the user group meeting last month, I highly encourage you to check it out. Some really powerful use cases for generative AI to accelerate the ability of physicians to complete some of their daily tasks. But
Matt, I apologize. Where can they find that? What would they have to search for to find?
Oh, yeah, it's on the Epic website, user group meeting. Yeah. I think from our side, we have something called DAX Copilot, which is known as the Dragon Ambient experience, and it's really one of the first use cases that I've seen. Clinicians become overly enthusiastic after using the product, as opposed to just the excitement of what the product might do. And we're seeing reductions in burnout, but more importantly, patients are more satisfied with their interactions with their physician. And the way this works is, rather than sort of me, when I'm seeing a patient hurriedly typing my note, working on the computer screen, I can have a conversation with my patient. That conversation is securely transcribed, and then that transcription is then converted into a note that I can review and sign. And what really makes the technology amazing, to me at least, is that as an NLP problem, that it's actually quite difficult to do, because if you think about an average conversation that I have with my patients, we're not just going to talk about medical care, the reason for the visit, right? We're going to talk about their son's Little League game. We might talk about the aunt's recent cooking at a picnic or whatever, and those things are difficult to sort of filter out. And what it requires is a capable language model that understands context, understands the purpose for this transcript is a medical visit, and the purpose of converting that transcript note into a clinical draft is for the purposes of documentation. And so, yeah.
Go ahead. Please,
oh, sorry.
Ahead.
I would just say that, and so that efficiency gain from the use of the generative technology in that clinical workflow, but importantly, making it so that it's already in a system that clinicians use every day, I think is going to be a big benefit.
So I can tell you that from my discussions, talking about burnout and how we're going to alleviate is front and center in everyone's conversation. So I feel badly to do what I'm about to do, which is to short circuit that conversation. I think we could have a long time. I have some questions for Chris about how we can help cardiologists avoid burnout. But because we're getting close to the close, I'd like to see if we could at least perhaps just touch on the following topic, which is, do you see any differences in both the use cases and the justification and then the uses of your tools and technologies in community hospitals versus academic health centers. Let's start with you, Matt, and then go to Chris.
Yeah, I think, so you're referring to sort of just the distribution of different populations and health systems. I think that that's critical, right? We spend a lot of time, obviously, in my career, developing models to automate certain tasks, many of them clinical. And, we ran into what is a common problem, which is the idea of generalization, right? Generalizing across populations, across diseases, across, care pathways. And ultimately, as we saw, it requires a great deal of additional development work to get a model that can truly generalize. But I think as we sort of entered this large language model era, we found that there's lots of really effective tools to steer and to guide these models to conform to different, circumstances or situations. And so that has actually been pretty powerful. I'm thinking about tools and techniques like, Chris has referenced with his Copilot solution, the idea that I can ground the model to a specific clinical care, set of guidelines, for example, that are, important to my institution, or to ground the model in a certain context. These are tools and techniques that, of course, we make available both internally, but then to the broader ecosystem, on the Azure platform as part of an Azure AI Studio. But there's more and more tools are coming online that allow us to wield and use these models so that they can be purpose fit without a great deal of development work into different groups and situations.
So that makes me want to ask Chris a question, which I hope he won't be mad at me for asking him, which is, what Matt just said sounds right. But how are the regulatory authorities going to deal with the fact that we're customizing software to specific solutions? Because I presume that the evaluation process is on a certain population. How have you been thinking of that? And I apologize if that's
No, it's a great question. Look, I think we work very closely with the FDA, and I think they're very forward thinking about how they regulate AI in general. And there's definitely a dynamic component to that. But this is not a new problem, right? The problems to solve in a community setting is very different to an academic setting, right? I mentioned hypertrophic cardiomyopathy before, right? We have a cleared module, it was a de novo clearance, the first time that's ever been done, based on EKG analysis, right? Imaging-based analysis. But in the academic setting, right, the problem is very different to the community setting. In New York, there's 3 to 4 cardiologists across the entire greater New York area with specialist expertise in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. What do they want and appreciate? Well, they want help organizing some of the administrative tasks, once they've seen the patient, organizing the echo, getting the genetic testing, etc. Right? They don't really need help in making the diagnosis. But everywhere else, there's great cardiologists and PCPs, but they might see between 1 and 10 patients with HCM in their entire career with the disease. So they need a lot of help with picking up the patient and deciding on what to do, because the guidelines for all healthcare changes as new treatments come out. In that particular disease, there's new cardiac myosin inhibitors that are proving very effective. And so the FDA, when they're thinking about regulation of AI, has to think about it in the broader ecosystem. What they tend to do is they say, well, you set the indications for use and the intended user, and you define a test that will prove that out. And then your indication for use, your marketing claims, have to stay within whatever's proven to that test. If you now want to go out and start marketing to a different subtype of users, for example, PCPs versus academic cardiologists, you may need to do a different study. And so that's how they think about it right now. They make sure that it's matched to what you're trying to claim.
Great. Well, again, this is another topic we could spend a half an hour on, but I'm just informed that we ran out of time. So I just want to thank you, Chris, and thank you, Matt, for making time for this conversation. I personally learned a lot, and I wish I could chat with you for another half hour about it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Zach. Appreciate it.
Zach and NEJM AI, thank you very much for having us.
So thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Andrew Beam, a deputy editor at NEJM AI, and also an assistant professor at the Harvard School of Public Health. Andy?